Good afternoon to everyone in the Western Hemisphere. Good day, good evening to everyone in the East. I do want to make clear that it is 2 p.m. Washington time. That is when we are holding this briefing, just for those of you who may catch us online at a later date, so you understand what time this is happening and therefore the limits of our information. I'm Ken Pollack. I am the Vice President for Policy here at the Middle East Institute, and welcome. This is another in the series of briefings that we've been doing virtually to provide some expert analysis and commentary on the ongoing war between Israel and Iran. We are on the record today, just to be clear about that. And in addition, we'll start out with some opening remarks from each of our speakers, and then we'll move swiftly into questions and answers. And if you'd like to ask a question, you're welcome to do so. To do so, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. If you are not familiar with it, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will find a Q&A button located between the green share button and the show captions button. If you click on that, it'll open up a dialog box. You can type your question in there, and then I will present the questions to the speakers as we go along. I'll group some because we get lots of questions on similar topics and make it easier to put it to the speakers. But I'd like to start by asking each of our speakers to just comment on what they've seen out there, what's caught their eye, especially in the last 24 hours. And we've got three fantastic speakers for you, as always. We have General Joseph Votel. General Votel was the commander of U.S. Central Command and also the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, a very, very rare pairing and the capstones of a long military career. He's joined by Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan, also an old Navy hand who ended his career as the commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, which of course is the naval component of U.S. Central Command. And then finally, my colleague Alex Vatanka, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Alex is, I think, well known to all of you, a very well-regarded specialist on Iran. So with that little bit of introduction, let's dive into things. General Votel, why don't we start with you? Just what have you seen, in particular over the last 24 hours, but over the entire course of the conflict? What have you found interesting? What's caught your eye? What should our viewers be thinking about in your view?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. It's great to be with you, and thanks to everybody who has joined us, and especially glad to be on with Kid and Alex here to talk about this really critical and emerging topic here. I think the thing that I've been paying the most attention to, really from the beginning of this, just in the last 36, 48 hours, has been the targeting, and it is what Israel has been going after, and then subsequently what Iran has been going after on the Israeli side. And as a former combatant commander, I think what I try to look at in things like this is who has the initiative, who has the momentum. And in my view right now, I think that clearly resides with the Israelis, certainly with the Israeli military at this point. I think this can shift back and forth. I don't know if it will, but clearly what we're seeing right now is the Israeli military really exerting their will right now in Iran. And again, I think the surest indicator of kind of what's going to happen in the future, I think, is what is happening, what has been happening. And so those are the kinds of things I'm looking at. So as I look at the type of targets and the type of operations that Israel has launched here, to me, I mean, it's very clearly focused in the beginning. They were trying to remove the ability for the Iranians to see what was going to happen and to protect themselves and their vital assets. And I think we can see we're going after air defense targets and other things. Their command and control nodes are really focused on that. I think the Israelis were also making it trying to make it very difficult for the Iranians to respond effectively. Certainly, the targeting of the senior military leadership fulfills a number of objectives for them. But one of those, of course, is that it makes it much more difficult for them to respond in a coherent and meaningful fashion. And I think that is, I think, certainly having an impact on Iran and their response so far. And then, of course, they really focus very heavily on kind of the object of their primary concern, which has been the nuclear weapons program, with their targeting of Natanz, and their targeting of other nuclear weapons program related infrastructure, and of course going after scientists and removing them as well. So I think what you're seeing is a pretty sophisticated approach, and I think you have to, as a military person, look at the ability of the Israeli Defense Forces to synchronize all of this. I mean, the first wave, 200 aircraft, 300 plus bombs, 100 plus targets, all synchronized. And I think there's some very good information out there now on their use of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence tools and helping them do that. And what I think we've subsequently seen in kind of the follow-on waves of strikes certainly has been to double down on the kind of the targets that I just talked about, but also to become a little bit more expansive. I think some of the most recent reporting indicates that they've spread out some of their targeting a little more broadly across the Iranian provinces. My impression here is I think what they're trying to do is trying to pressurize the regime here. So in addition to taking away their capabilities, operating freely, going wherever they want, demonstrating their ability to go wherever they want, is to continue to put a lot of pressure on the regime. And of course, there are certain levels that they can continue to go to here. Obviously, we've seen them go after the military and after the nuclear weapons program. We have not necessarily seen them going after economic targets or actually after the most senior members of the regime. Certainly, that is, could be something we would see down the line. But I think what you're seeing is the Israelis continuing to ratchet up the pressure as the campaign continues. A campaign that they are apparently prepared to sustain here for certainly a number of days and probably weeks as well. The Iranian response here certainly not inconsequential when you're sending hundreds of drones and a large number of ballistic missiles that are, some of which are penetrating through Iron Dome and finding their location. It looks to me like a lot of their targeting is not particularly accurate. Looks like it has been focused primarily at population centers, so that is a concern that is likely to raise the stakes for the Israelis and cause them to even be more aggressive, perhaps, in their counter targeting here with this. So, Ken, those are kinds of the things I'm trying to pay attention to right now to understand this. I think these give us indications of the direction which the campaign, the military campaign itself, is going to go, and what might happen in the future.
That's perfect. That's a great start for us, General. Admiral, how about you? What's caught your eye? What's of interest to you? What should we be thinking about?
Well, thanks, Ken, and I echo what Joe said, and thanks for having us join this broadcast. There's a lot certainly we can talk about. I 100% agree with everything Joe said, and I'll amplify just a couple things there, and then I have a couple other points. The first one is when you look at the targeting, clearly this initial round, and I think we should look at this as some kind of sequence, and we don't really know how the sequence is going to play out over time, but in this initial sequence, it was absolutely designed to get after the IRGC leadership, which is the heart of their military. It was designed to weaken it. It was also designed then, as a result, to weaken the Iranian military, with the result of trying to weaken the leadership, despite the fact that they didn't target the very senior leadership. That is the design, and so that's why you saw, as Joe was describing, it's not just the nuke sites that were gone after, and the leadership piece, I think, and the targeting of the leadership is important to drill down just for a second on, Ken. If you're now an Iranian leader, you're not sure where you've been infiltrated, you don't know who to trust, and you don't know how to communicate because you don't know what of those methods are compromised. And that goes to Joe's point. That's why it makes it hard for them to respond in a coherent way. They're still going to respond. They have hundreds of ballistic missiles. Those weren't all taken out by hundreds of ballistic missile launch sites, let alone ballistic missiles. So to bring those to bear, as Joe said, you need to have, some element of your leadership and command and control intact. And obviously, the Israelis have impacted that, and it's helping them now have less of a problem in terms of retaliation that they would. The second point I'll make, and it also echoes what Joe said, is the Israelis are going to be persistent. We've seen this in other military operations that they ran. They're going to go after everything on their target list until it's done. And that may mean revisits, assessments of BDA. And at the same time, because they've been attacking the network, they've been learning new things that they didn't know. And there'll be more targets at it that they know more about or enough about to go after. So you're going to see not just the sequence they have planned, but they'll have branch plans based on information that they gain that they'll go forward. So that's from the military side. From the U.S. side, I'd say our biggest concern is force protection. You've seen the president and the secretaries talk about that. So if you're one of the commanders in the region, you're very worried about your force protecting your forces, your facilities, and the rest. Will Iran retaliate against U.S. facilities or not? President Trump has put that decision in the hands of the Iranians. Really, he said, don't attack U.S. forces. This was, we weren't the ones that did this, but I don't suspect it's in Iran's best interest to go after U.S. and bring U.S. into it right now. But as we were talking just before we came in there, I was wrong before about whether this thing would happen before Sunday. I could be wrong about that too. And I'll close with this, Ken, and it goes to the other lens that I like to look at this thing through is through our allies and partners. I spent a lot of time in Fifth Fleet living with our allies and partners and dealing with them on a daily basis. So if we just take two, for example, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and you throw Bahrain into the same mix, obviously they don't like Iran, right? But they have a very complex problem. They have a street that's very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and it's the Israelis that are doing these attacks, and that's the complexity that they're having to deal with. So you're not going to see them supporting these attacks, certainly in an overt way, but it certainly adds complexity. And what happens next? It's super important that we, as the United States, keep our partners informed about what we're doing and what we're seeing, because on the back end of this, it'll be us in the region, and we clearly want to have good relationships when this is over with our Arab partners in the region.
That's terrific, Admiral. All right, Alex, how about you? What's on your mind? What's caught your eye over the last 24, 36 hours?
So, Ken, what I think it's been most interesting for me to watch is we've gone from an Iranian reaction and assessment of all of these strikes by Israel being perhaps mostly tied to the issue of whether Iran should enrich uranium or not. As I said the other day in one of the panels, that, the Americans are playing the good cop here. President Trump's kept the door for diplomacy open. The Israelis are playing the bad cop, saying, if you don't give Trump what he wants, then we'll come after you. But I'm wondering if that is shifting. I certainly think that is the case when you're looking at the Iranian reactions officials and the posturing in the general sense that it's not about enrichment. We might be going in the direction of regime change as the end goal here. That's certainly what I think a majority of Iranian officials think, what Israel wants. The big unknown in all of this is whether the Israelis somehow can get Trump to buy into it the way he bought into the initial attack on Iran. That seems to be the narrative increasingly in Iranian sources and circles that I've been monitoring. As a result, what you've seen is a big effort on the part of the regime to shape public opinion, to control and shape public opinion. So you're seeing this campaign aimed at shoring up the nationalist sentiment. If Bibi Netanyahu tells you this war is between Israel and the regime, the Iranian regime wants the Iranian people to think it's not. It's about Israel coming after the motherland, Iran, and you should all rally around the flag. So you've seen that today with the various protests. You see a very strong effort to publicize, the death of the civilians. There's been about 78 deaths in Tehran, about 38 up in the northwestern Tabriz. So you have pictures of dead civilians, some of them famous, some of people who have been known in media, sports people, athletes, and kids, really going after trying to create that raw anger in society, which, it's quite telling. Now, that is aimed to achieve a couple of things, because again, to my point about what is Israel's end goal here, if Prime Minister Netanyahu means what he says about, Iranian people will be free very soon, then I guess if you're an Iranian official, you're wondering, what do the Israelis already have in motion? And if you're an Iranian official today, the last thing you want to do is be cocky about it, because they were basically caught with massive surprise. Senior members are already gone. Hossein Salami, the head of Revolutionary Guards, dead. Mohammad Bagheri, the head Joint Chief of Staff, dead. I mean, the number of prominent nuclear scientists dead. What else do the Israelis have up their sleeves? So this becomes a real issue, hence trying to control public opinion, make sure you don't have, in a general population that is extremely anti-regime, you don't have those segments who go from being angry to actually mobilizing against the regime. And what if the Israelis actually have a role in that to play too, right? So that's really seems to be one of the big changes that I have seen. Otherwise, what they're doing is obviously hitting Israel. They need to say face from their perspective, whether they can shape Israel's calculations going forward by hitting some of these civilian targets or urban targets remains to be seen. But they don't seem at this point to care much. They just need to show muscle, and that's what they're doing. I also wanted to say one thing you also have seen throughout this, very early on, this idea of continuity, that there is no any power vacuum at the top. So what Khamenei has done very quickly, he's been replacing those senior members of the regime in the armed forces, Revolutionary Guards, very quickly to replace them without any kind of fanfare. They're just told, this is your job, get on with it. Two other things, and I'll stop, Ken. I think when I look at the United States, I certainly see the U.S. end goal as of right now of being one to bring Iran back to the negotiation table, but this time around be more serious about making some bigger concessions than that President Trump had been hoping for since this process began in early April, right? That seems to be the US's position right now. Not an expansion of the war. I don't see US or Iran interested in expansion of this war to go beyond the region. Although the last few hours, there are reports suggesting that Israel has hit natural gas facilities in the Persian Gulf, does raise the stake. Will Iran go for tit for tat in terms of hitting energy resources? It's hard for me to see, because Iran right now is trying to really keep the Arab world on side. So I think the Iranians have to bite the bullet, let this one go. But on last point I make is on Israel. That's the big one. That's sort of kind of what I began with. The Israelis, even with a ceasefire, let's say United States can agree to bring about a ceasefire. A big question mark here, but let me just put it out there. There is a ceasefire, but is that enough for Israel? Is the enrichment issue at this point really what Israel cares about? And once you've started this process, if you're Israel, would you not try maybe go all the way and go for the ultimate prize, which is change of the regime? Because that's fundamentally what Israel is concerned about. But again, will President Trump sign up for that? And that's the great unknown. But that's basically what I've been watching for, Ken. I just in a few minutes that we have to summarize it.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. And we're already getting just a whole slew of terrific questions. So many good topics. It's hard to know where to start. But Alex, you made that job easy for me, because a number of the questions are around the specific issues that you were touching on there at the end. And I'm going to put them this way. Clearly, the Israelis are going after the leadership of the IRGC, of the Iranian armed forces. They're also striking at some of the actual capabilities themselves, the field forces, etc. And I think there's a general question, which I'd like to hear all three of you talk about from your different vantage points, in terms of what it would be possible to do in terms of inflicting damage on the regime's military and internal security forces, and then the likelihood that this could actually spur a wider revolt against the regime. As you point out, Alex, this is clearly something that is in the back of the Israelis' minds. Prime Minister Netanyahu called on the Iranian people to rise up. So this is clearly something that they're thinking. I think they are hoping that this will happen. But as you point out, what we don't know is how much are they actually planning to try to make it happen. So Alex, let me start with you, and let me take another piece of what you were starting with there and say, what needs to happen inside Iran to enable a successful revolt. I mean, the Iranian people have been rising up against their government pretty regularly, every 2, 3, 4 years since 1999. It's never succeeded, right? So what would it take do you think, for them to successfully do so?
Couple of quick remarks, Ken. As you pointed out, there's a history of, particularly sort of on the fringes of the territory in Balochistan and Kurdistan elsewhere. There's certainly always ethnic groups that are upset with the central government in Tehran and ready to pick up arms. If you have multiple, if you will, uprisings here and there, that will not exhaust, but it will certainly become more of an additional burden for the central government and security forces. The Israelis do have a record of working with some of these groups, certainly in Balochistan. They have excellent ties with the Iranian Kurds. I don't know if that's going to be something that might happen, but in the past, certainly, central government left to its devices has been able to, in time, to suppress. But we are in very extraordinary times with the Israeli Air Force flying unhindered over Tehran's sky. So who knows? But one way of looking at it is in terms of whether Israel can mobilize ethnic groups or even political actors. I mean, there are a number of Iranian opposition groups. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any effort to sort of use the armed option against the Islamic Republic. So it's been more of a political discourse than arguing for an armed insurrection against the Islamic Republic. One other scenario to point out, though, Ken, here is Ali Khamenei. He's been there since 1989. He owns the file on Israel. The enmity that Iran has is not Iranian enmity towards Israel, it's Ali Khamenei's enmity against Israel. This is a fight he picked up, essentially, I would argue, and he nurtured it for as long as he's been there, 36 years. And there are calls, many calls, for him to basically accept the fact that this is all his fault, that the Israelis didn't wake up one day and start striking Iran. It was Iran that kind of essentially began by this narrative that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Incidentally, this regime of the Islamic Republic is also guilty, have done something very similar to Saddam Hussein. If you remember, when Khomeini came to power and the Shah left in February of 1979, it took Saddam Hussein 19 months before he actually invaded Iran. In those 19 months, what he heard from the Ayatollahs and the radicals in Tehran was, we will get rid of you, Saddam, you're a tyrant, you have to go. So this is a regime that has a history of poking, if you will, some of its neighbors he doesn't like in the eye, and it comes to bite it. But the other point of this regime is also, it's about regime survival. It's about regime survival. That's the ultimate goal of Ali Khamenei. Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, had a phone call a few hours ago with the European Union's chief foreign policy official, Mrs. Kallas. And basically what I heard Araghchi say was, if you guys, meaning the Europeans, the West, the Americans, can get yourselves together to sort of kind of condemn what Israel's done by attacking us, then diplomacy might have a chance. To me, that sounded like they're looking for a way back to the diplomatic talks. But Iran's fundamental problem is this. It's not about the nuclear issue. It's about their position on Israel, sponsoring the acts of resistance. That's where they have to make some concessions. That's the only way you're going to prevent this tit for tat from continuing now, or even if it's suspended, we put it aside, it will probably come back again at some point in the future, because it requires a fundamental shift of thinking on the part of the Islamic Republic and demand Ali Khamenei more than anyone else before we can really say we've turned the page. But let me stop there, Ken.
That's terrific, though, Alex. Okay, General Votel, let me put it back to you. And same question, but a different lens. What are the Israelis capable of doing? What's their ability to degrade Iran's military leadership beyond what they've already done, to degrade the actual combat forces and the internal security forces, right? Have they got the ability to really do enough damage to start to kind of loosen the regime's hold and make possible some kind of a more successful uprising?
Well, yeah, I think we have to recognize that the Israeli military is very powerful, well-equipped, well-led, and experienced military. So yes, they have the capability to continue to inflict a lot of damage on the Iranian, on the regime, on the Iranian armed forces and all of their forms. So they have pretty fairly deep magazines. I mean, Israel is a small country, so they have to rely on their reserves, and there is a sustainment aspect of that. But they have probably learned a lot about sustaining their forces through lengthy campaign in Hamas and what that against Hamas and what that might take. So yeah, I give the Israeli Defense Forces high marks for their ability to continue to stay and do a lot of damage. And of course, we've seen them do very sophisticated things. I mean, one of the things they did as part of this was actually penetrate into Iran and launch UAVs from within the country. So, I mean, they have an extraordinary intelligence capability. They're very savvy in terms of how they do this. They're very, very experienced. I think it's a very viable strategy for a nation, for a military to consider that you would try to go after the instruments of power, of legitimacy, of control that the regime has in place and try to loosen that. I think one of the, it's interesting, one of the leaders I think that was killed in this initial thing is the Basij commander, and so the linkages back into internal security. I think we have to appreciate that Iran is a country that has a high level of control over the people, and that's of course been the result of decades and decades of the regime being in place and putting pressure back down onto the people. So beginning to loosen that, beginning to disrupt that, beginning to break that apart is a direct threat to the regime's ability to maintain control. And so I do consider that to be a viable strategy. I mean, that can be done kinetically, it can be done information wise. There's a variety of other things that could be done with this, but I do think that's a very likely approach that we might see is the targeting the efforts to just continue to undermine the instruments that keep the regime in power and in control. And I think that's going to be something we're going to see as part of their overall targeting approach.
Admiral, I'd like to bring you into this as well. I mean, as you point out, you were out there in Bahrain for a whole while, watching this regime, watching it do its thing. So first point, anything you'd like to add on to what General Votel just added there? Anything else we should think about? But then let's go a step beyond that, because again, I think we are all old hands at this. We've thought about this problem for a long time, and of course, one of the great dangers out there, always have said, is that when the regime is in extremis, if its existence is really threatened, it might well lash out, right? So again, you were sitting there in Bahrain. Imagine this is a regime that looks like it's going down the tube. What are you telling Washington about what the dangers are, and what do you need to defend against those dangers?
So let me go to the first part of the question, which was related to what Joe was talking about. And you remember I led in with the fact that the end result, if you just, if you do damage to the IRGC and then do damage to the military leadership, and then that does end up weakening the regime. So that path is obviously a clear one. That said, there's a leap of faith here now that's a difficult one, and that is, you can continue to do that. But where's the threshold where that generates revolt, right? Because the regime change is a difficult subject for us in the U.S. We've seen attempts to do this multiple times. I would say we're probably the least equipped to be able to give you an answer on what's going to end up with a successful regime change. But I also think it's a very complex problem in Iran, and Alex was describing a bunch of the complexities to generate revolt, even in times like this, because there's a counter movement that happens when a country's attacked, and that is a nationalism piece. And so, in other words, you move to protect, and it joins certain groups together that maybe weren't enjoined because they see the country under attack. So where's that threshold between doing one or doing the other? I think that's a difficult, complex question, and I don't know that we're very good at giving you the best answer. In terms of how could Iran lash out, and then how are we prepared, which was the second half of your question. Iran doesn't have a lot of tools left in its kit to lash out anymore. And I think that's an important piece because it goes to what Alex and General Votel were talking about. So they need some kind of other de-escalation or off-ramp to tackle. But the first thing is, if when we talk about force protection, all we do in the region is think about how to best protect our forces and have them postured in a way so that they're not as vulnerable when something like this is going on. Rest assured that we have deep plans and things that we do to put us in the best posture. We've done this in other entities, for instance, other events, for example, when we went into Syria and went after chemical weapons sites, we knew there was going to be a retaliation. So we know and understand how to posture our forces for the blowback that comes, right? So they'll be well rehearsed in doing that. And I think anything that you're asked for, you get in answer to your question. And it's not hard you're not going to not ask. So the bigger issue is the fact that is Iran going to take advantage of an off-ramp, which is the diplomatic course here? I think that's the bigger issue. And because their ability to do something beyond that has been weakened because of the loss of Hezbollah, weakened because Syria is not in the region anymore as an ally of theirs. And same thing with Hamas and the rest. So you're left with the Houthis and the Quds force that's deployed in some cases in Syria, in some cases in Iraq. But their leadership has been significantly greater, which is why I said there's not a lot left in their toolkit. So I think the question is, does Iran think that they've done enough in terms of lashing back that they can throw an olive branch to get some talks going again? I think it's a long shot, to be honest, that they'll come to the table here in the near future. But it's, in my opinion, they don't have a lot to go. They can cause damage, right? And I'll just close with the one that they've always threatened to do in the past. Let's close the Straits of Hormuz. Now they have the ability to potentially close two straits, the Red Sea, which is already not being used, and then you have Hormuz. The problem with closing Hormuz is they then don't get the economic benefit of flowing their oil out. But if the Israelis destroy energy transit terminals and such of the Iranians now, and they don't have a capability to export stuff to get economic benefit from. Now the threatening to close the straits is a big deal, and that can be a card that gets played because you will see that have a much more greater impact in the markets that we're seeing today, even with the prices of oil going up as they have in the last 24 hours.
So that's great, Admiral. And so there are a bunch of other questions, and I want to pose another one right to you next, which is, again, about this issue of escalation. So I think you made a very good point about the limitations on Iran's abilities, but you all said Iran can do something. What, as you look out there, what are some scenarios that you see for horizontal escalation, for bringing other countries into this conflict? And, which are there indicators and warnings that we should, be thinking about in terms of, red light, horizontal warning could be coming?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see other nations like the European nations getting involved, in the military side of this. It's more a function of, does the U.S. get involved in finishing off or helping to finish off the nuclear capabilities that are going to be remaining that maybe the Israelis can't go after. I want to say something related to that because it's important. I don't know that it's only the U.S. that can get after what they haven't gotten on the nuclear side. I see that the Israelis have a different way than the U.S. would to get after it. And we already have seen, as this sequence of events has played out, they went after certain things in a completely different way than the United States would have if they were doing these attacks. They may very well have in the sequence a way to get after the deeper buried sites and also get after the things that have already been enriched, right, and those caches and where they are. So that's important. But I don't see it expanding in a way where other nations necessarily get involved, other than the U.S. potentially getting drawn into it. And the way that it happens is in other places, right? Our forces in Syria or Iraq or our headquarters and disposition in Arab countries. And then if they get attacked, does that then bring those Arab nations into it? I don't think so. I think it'll be seen for what it's seen. And I just don't see the Iranians lashing out against Arab partners in this. I mean, Arab nations in this. It would be more U.S. facilities on the soil of some of those countries.
That's great. John Votel, got a great question here that I'm dying to hear your answer to, which is effectively kind of how does this end? What does victory look like for the Israelis? When do they decide that they've done enough? And, on the Iranian side, is there a moment when they also agree to kind of, halas enough, let's go back and lick our wounds. What does the end game look like here?
Yeah, I mean, this is really directly related to the political objectives that the prime minister outlines, and he will, I think he and those who are around him and supporting him and advising him will ultimately be the ones that'll make the decision on this. I know what he kind of stated yesterday was the purpose of all of this was to neutralize an existential threat, and so that would seem to be the end state. Now, whether that existential threat is the neutralization of the nuclear weapons program or whether it is the removal of the regime, I think there needs to be some clarification in terms of that. So I think what Israel has learned over the last almost 2 years now of continuous combat in a variety of different areas is that it's to their benefit to press. As kids said, they've got a long list of things they're going to go after, and they're probably going to go after all of them. And so I think they will continue to do that. So I think what it will have to be an assessment by the prime minister that they have completed the mission of neutralizing. They no longer feel that there is a threat to them that can be manifested and hold the nation of Israel at risk. I think that's what that looks like. Now, on the other aspect of this, as we've been talking about, is if there is efforts at an off ramp. I mean, my personal view is I do think that the Iranian tactic of delaying and trying to push things out and then agreeing to talks to extend things out. I think that's beginning to run its course here. I think there'll have to be something very specific that they say that they indicate to indicate a different change in their policy or a different change, certainly in their behavior, that they're willing before we will get back to kind of meaningful discussions at this point. So I think that would be an indicator on that side. I mean, you could conceivably, if there's enough damage done, and the Iranian regime said enough, and we're ready to talk again, and then you could get to something there where the regime potentially remains in place, but certainly without their nuclear weapons program, that certainly could be an end state in this. I think what we don't know is what is the full confines of what the Israeli objective is here.
So that's great, John. And just, I'd like to highlight, one of the things that struck me in what you're saying is that ultimately, even though this short-circuited the negotiations, assuming that this is ultimately about the nuclear program, that this was an alternative to the negotiations as the Israelis saw it. The point that you're making is it may still need to come back to the negotiations to get the kind of a final conclusion that we're all looking for.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's important for everybody to appreciate the war, which we're watching here right now, is an extension of politics by other means. And so, I mean, Israel is trying to drive towards an end state, and the United States seems to be supportive of that end state. And I mean, that's what we were after through a different approach here. But now we find ourselves at a different place in the movie, but I think that end state is still one that is pretty consistent.
Outstanding. All right, next question's for you, Alex, and it's another big one. Assuming that the Islamic Republic is not overthrown as a result of this, how does this war change Iran's domestic politics? How does it change the power relationships? Who does it advantage? Who does it disadvantage? You and I talked a little bit about succession issues yesterday when this first started, but just the broad question of how does this war change Iranian internal politics, assuming that the regime does survive?
So that's a great question, but as you said, Ken, pretty tough. But look, if I could just summarize it, the Islamic Republic as a regime, as an entity, is obviously divided between the so-called moderates, pragmatics, and the so-called hardliners. And who controls Iran's regional policies, including the position on Israel, its ballistic missile program, the drones, and the security part of the nuclear program? All of them lie with the Revolutionary Guards. So essentially what I'm saying is the ones who have brought the country and the regime to the brink of disaster are the hardliners. And they have a lot of answering to do to the likes of Masoud Pezeshkian and the so-called moderates pragmatic. Now, I don't know whether this is going, this war, if Iran comes out of it still intact, if it's going to empower the so-called moderates who basically want to sort of change policy. I mean, people like Mohammad Khatami going back to the late 1990s and many others have been making this point. Why are we so hell-bent on this fight with Israel? We're a non-Arab country who are playing more radical game here against Israel than even the Palestinians. So what's the story here? So you have, again, a majority view, which again includes, I think, pretty much the consensus view in the so-called moderate pragmatic camp, that wants to see major fundamental shifts in foreign policy. The problem is a structural one. Major foreign policy shifts can only happen if you have the old man at the top of the pyramid, Ali Khamenei, to buy into it. He might buy into it because he is not someone who takes risks lightly. That's why he's been there since 1989. He is pretty cautious despite some of the words that comes out of his mouth. And the Revolutionary Guards. And the Revolutionary Guards, the part I look at is this, Ken. How old are the folks that Israel has been assassinated the last few days? These are guys, men in their 60s, late 50s, 60s. Most of them joined the revolution when they were teenagers or early on in their 20s in 1979 onwards. They put on the uniform and they spent 46 years either fighting Saddam or becoming bureaucrats in the IRGC, made their money. But these guys are followed by second and third generation Revolutionary Guards in leadership who now have to make that fundamental decision in terms of their own well-being, careers going forward. They look at the Iranian public opinion, which hates basically the Revolutionary Guards for everything that they stand for. They look at Israel, taking the gloves off them, coming after him, and they're probably having to make that very important political discussion or calculation and judgment call. What's the best way forward for them? So by joining forces, if you will, with the existing moderate pragmatic forces who long time have argued for the need to change foreign policy, to reduce tensions with the United States, to drop enmity with Israel, look for other ways to help the Palestinians, not through the acts of resistance, but through political sort of alliance making with the likes of Saudi Arabia and others to put pressure on Israel to give the Palestinians a better shot in this world. So there are things that could happen, but, final point, can I say this? If you look at the last decade plus, whenever diplomacy with the United States hasn't worked out, the traditional argument is that Khamenei engineers for a hardliner to come in. So when the dialogue with Mohammad Khatami didn't work out, Khamenei and his people engineered for the rise of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the right-winger, the populist that destroyed so much in 8 years. Right? When Rouhani didn't work out, when he tried with the JCPOA and the United States walked away from that deal, what did Khamenei do? He engineered the rise of Ibrahim Raisi, another right-winger. When that didn't work, so Khamenei has been the kingmaker behind the scenes. Right now, you have to question his ability because the country has never been here before. Remember, last time Iran was at war was during the Iran-Iraq war in a very different era, very different conditions. So I do actually have this question for me as an analyst. What is Khamenei's ability right now to steer the ship forward? Because essentially, most people who are honest with themselves would have to agree he is more responsible than anyone else for Iran being where it is right now. So why would you trust this man's judgment about what should happen in the future?
Sounds like a great piece to write, Alex. I'll look forward to reading that very soon. General Votel, I know you've got to depart a little bit early on us, so I want to put another question to you that I think you're the best person to answer, and it's actually one of the ones that I've been thinking about almost from the beginning of this, and you touched on it a little bit in your earliest comments, and that question is Ferdo. Right. So the Iranians famously have this massive facility deep, deep underground in a mountain near the holy city of Qom, a place called Ferdo. It's a centrifuge cascade, very big, very advanced, could enrich the uranium for nuclear weapons all by itself. It's always been the toughest challenge for the Israelis. And so far, it doesn't really look like the Israelis have touched it. There were some reports yesterday that maybe there was something going on there, but it doesn't seem to have panned out. It doesn't seem like they've made any kind of a major effort against Ferdo. I will tell you, when we get back to this question of the end game, I can't imagine how the Israelis call this operation a success and leave Ferdo intact. So help us to understand what may be going on there. Is this just a bridge too far? Have the Israelis got something else up their sleeve? Again, does this go back to Admiral Donegan's point that they're going to prosecute this war in the manner that they see fit? But, you know, there's a big big question mark, I think, hanging over that mountain at Ferdo. Why haven't the Israelis hit it yet?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I definitely understand the significance of the question you're asking here. I think there's a variety of ways to think about this, and I would kind of associate myself with kids thinking on this in terms of what they're going to go after. They're going to be very deliberate with this. They've got a plan. They're executing. They're rolling it out. It's dynamic enough that they're assessing things and making sure that they have that. I don't think we should completely dismiss the fact that that the success that they achieve early on in this may also be, at least in their own minds, enticing to the United States to come in and finish this thing off and be done with it. That there would be that the United States military would come in and provide some assistance. I don't know that I'm just sharing with you my thoughts on this, but I think it largely has to do with the targeting approach. They go after the things that are most vulnerable, the things that are most important for them to eliminate and to remove, to continue to give them the freedom to operate over Iran. And with that, then that gives them the opportunity to develop more and more options to go after things like Fordo or other significant things. So I think it is more a function of their overall strategy and targeting approach than it is anything else here right now. I can't imagine. And as I think Kid kind of alluded to, this is the Israeli military. They are, certainly not only the most proficient and capable military in the Middle East, but really one of the most proficient and capable militaries around the world. And they have demonstrated a level of initiative, a level of innovativeness, a level of savviness through a whole variety of operations. And we shouldn't dismiss the fact that they have been thinking through this problem and recognizing the challenge this presents to a U.S. president, to U.S. policymakers about committing to do something like this. At the same time, we're trying to encourage people to kind of come to the table on this, that they are probably developing some of their own capabilities that would do that. And by the way, these things all operate on have power sources and everything else. So there are ways that you can have effects against Fordo without necessarily going deep and destroying the whole thing itself. So I think we have to think through that a little bit more. But I mean, that's kind of my thinking on that right now, Ken.
That's terrific, General. And I know you need to duck out, so thanks so much for joining us. We'll look forward to having you on again at some point in time. Admiral, I want to pose the next question to you. And again, it's very much along the lines of some of the questions I've already put to you. But again, we got a lot of questions about this, and that's about our allies and the potential for them to get hit, get drawn into it. We've got questions about British forces and positions around the region. We've got questions about the Jordanians. We've got questions about the Omanis. We've got questions about the Bahrainis. Let's just put it broadly then, right? I don't want you to go country by country and, lay out the scenario by which each of them comes in. But, again, let's go back to this question a little bit. And, I'll put the question to you, are there circumstances in which you could see one or more of our allies getting pulled in, getting hit in ways that they prefer not to, very clearly?
Well, no, I don't want to commit the sin that we always talk about, that committed when you talk about the Middle East, and that's grouping up our allies into and partners into one entity, whether that be the GCC or Arab nations. It's
Fair
fraught
enough.
with uh, the ability to instantly get cross-threaded with reality. So, but what I will say is that none of them right now want to be not to be drawn into this beyond the fact that geographically they're the closest to the problem set, right? What they're going to be looking, the lens they're looking at this through is when it's over, the United States is oceans away, right? The Israelis are a ballistic missile away, but they're underneath the envelopes of a tremendous capability that Iran will still have of some kind when it's all over, right? And their other concern is the proliferation of the proxies and other elements of Iran. Again, they know Iran's not going to sit still, and just because Hezbollah was decimated, that's the end of Hezbollah, or that Syria has now under a different government that's not sympathetic to Iran. They're not trying to shift that in a different direction. They also see Iran moving across the Red Sea into East Africa, right, and Sudan and other places. In other words, Iran isn't going to sit still if they stick to the same tactic that they've sat with before. So what I think all of those nations that you put together are the lens they're going to look through it from is they want to keep their nation intact. They want to keep the economic viability of their country intact, right? So if you're, for instance, the Emirates, you want to keep a safe and secure place for businesses, and the same thing for Saudi. So that's the lens they're going to look at it through. And that's why you see Jordan, for instance, coming up and say, hey, not my airspace. We're not, you're not using our airspace to do X, Y, or Z. That doesn't mean they won't shoot missiles that fly over their airspace down, because they'll do that whether they're coming from either direction. So in my opinion, that that's how they're going to be looking at it, Ken. They're going to be looking at it from that standpoint. They also want to, they want to keep a positive relationship with the United States, right? Most of those countries in one way or another want to keep a very positive relationship with the United States. And those countries that happen to have U.S. forces based in or near them are going to be concerned that those areas can be targeted by Iran, and therefore it's their country that's also getting targeted. That's the way I see it. But you'd actually have to go through those individually to talk about them because each are unique in terms of whether they have U.S. forces there, don't have U.S. forces there, what's their current relationship with the United States, what's their current relationship with Iran, and so on. Because you and I know that certain countries, Arab countries, have established relationship with Iran, but in some cases that's more to buy time than because they see a future with Iran under the current regime.
That's great.
Can I answer one? Just jump on the one thing
go right ahead.
to the left.
Go right ahead.
When you were talking about, hey, how do I get into Ferdo? We're only at day 2, 3, whatever it is of this thing. And I think that's really what Joe was trying to say and what I was trying to say earlier. In the sequence of things, that doesn't have to be number one. And what was number one was the things needed the most surprise on, right? And they did a phenomenal job. The Israelis did a phenomenal job at decimating some leaders that all across the country. And this wasn't a Hezbollah-like attack on a leadership group that was meeting in a particular place. This leadership that they took out was spread across different elements of Tehran and Iran in different places, from residential areas to headquarters buildings and the rest. So I don't know where the next step in the sequence is and where Ferdo sits. If you understand it, as you understand very well, Israelis have been looking at this problem for a decade. They have a game plan for this. I just don't know what it is. I can't tell you what it is. 3 decades.
3 decades, exactly. Yeah, and as you're pointing out, Admiral, as an old Middle East military analyst, I expect the Israelis have some kind of plan, and I am fascinated to see what it's actually going to be. Alex, got another question for you. We've got a lot of questions here, at least a half dozen questions about Russia and China. right? And ultimately, I think the thrust of all of them, the real issue for you to take on here is, what does Iran's relationship with China and Russia look like after this? Again, let's assume that the regime survives, right? And they're trying to reassess. They went into this with some kind of relationship with Russia, some kind of relationship with China, but neither of them has been able to come to Iran's defense, right? Neither of them, at least so far, has been able to help Iran in any way. Now, maybe that'll change. Maybe we will see Russian combat forces deploying to Iran to defend it the way that they did in basically the 1970s, the way that they threatened to do so in 1973. Possible. We haven't seen it, right? So coming out of this, does this make Iran more dependent on China and Russia? Does it cause them to say, you know what, we really can't rely on Russia and China?
Look, I mean, Ken, that really comes down to the decision if it's going to be one to be made by Ali Khamenei, because he sets the strategic course when it comes to foreign policy. It's not the foreign ministry or the president. It's him and the inner circle around him in the Supreme Leader's office and the top leadership in the Revolution Guards. Certainly, that's been the case up to now. And I mean, famously, he came up with the concept of look east. A few years back, he's invested a lot in this idea of look east, meaning you depend more on the likes of Russia and China. That means you don't have to worry so much about the pressures you're under from the West. Looks great on paper, and there are all sorts of things that Iran has been able to do, join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS bloc, and all the rest of it. What has it amounted to in actual, metrics where we can measure and say, in terms of security, we can say that they're getting A, B, and C, therefore they're better off from the Russians, from the Chinese. As you pointed out, Ken, that's not the case. It is, if it is, we don't know about it. If there are Russians that are helping Iran with sort of quickly repair air defenses or do something else to resist what Israel's doing, then obviously that's have not come out yet. I can tell you that's not the story in the Persian language sources that I follow. Nobody's talking about the great Russian surprise or the Chinese surprise. All we've had from Russia is the offer to mediate between Israel and Iran, and you have to question the value of mediation at this point. So no, this goes back. This is a big question mark that really goes back to the heart of the worldview of one man, Ali Khamenei, and the Islamic Republic. They haven't come over the legacy of the 1979 revolution, which was essentially turned into an anti kind of Western movement. They haven't come over that fact. They're still kind of fighting a war that is kind of linked more to the mentality of the Cold War, this sort of Soviet mentality that has to do with the realities Iran faces today as country in 2025. But by the way, before I wrap up, I know we're almost out of time, Ken, and I want to make sure you because you do such a wonderful job summarizing, I want to give you space for that and hear you. But I just want to point out the strategic loneliness isn't just about Russia and China that Iran is experiencing, that it's essentially alone. I mean, which country can we point to that in fact is helping Iran? Look at Israel. Whether you like it or not, they got the US, they got most of Europe on their side. Iran is not getting any help from anyone. And I would include, I shouldn't say, I don't think they're getting help from the so-called what's left of the Axis of Resistance, but I question what the Axis of Resistance members can actually do at this point, because the whole idea of fighting wars in the region was you have the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, so they fight on your behalf in the region. Iran right now is fighting on home soil. Those axes or those groups can't be of much use to Iran other than spoilers, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and so on. That's not exactly a recipe for long-term strategic security that Khamenei has promised the people of Iran and clearly failed at.
Terrific. Thanks, Alex. All right, I'm going to forego my summary because we've got 2 or 3 questions that I want to put to Admiral Kidd, Admiral Donegan, pardon me, Kidd. In the last 2 minutes we've got, just with regard to hardware. With regard to hardware, we've got 2 or 3 questions about hardware, about the systems, and I'll ask the question this way. Anything about the performance of the hardware that surprised you? Anything on either the Iranian side or the Israeli side that caught your attention and go, oh, wow, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting those things to perform this way.
I'd say that the forte of the Israelis is the integration. So they take phenomenal hardware, they take AI, they take special forces, they take innovative tactics, and they bring them to bear in an integrated fashion, like but on a particular problem set that they've been studying, you know, and fully understand, and they merge it with intelligence that's second to none. So I'm not surprised by any of that. If anything, I'm surprised by they're even more effective than I thought they would be. And I'll close with one thing since we're basically out of time. What's victory for Iran look like? In my opinion, regime survival is victory for them. In other words, their bar for success is different than what it would be. It can be a decimation in a bunch of areas, but if the regime remains in charge, in their mind, they won. And that's the lens that they'll look at this from. And Alex would probably agree with me, I would think, on that point.
That's great. It's a terrific place to leave us, Admiral. Thank you both for this wonderful set of insights. I got a lot from it. I think our audience did as well. And just for those of you tuned into us, just to let you know, we will be doing another virtual briefing on Monday at 2:30 in the afternoon, Washington time, where we will have General Frank McKenzie, another former CENTCOM commander, Ambassador Barbara Leaf, former Assistant Secretary of State, Assistant Secretary of State for the Near East, and Alan Iyer, an expert on Iran's nuclear program, joining us. That's Monday at 2:30. Look for details, but once again, it will be a public on-the-record event. Other than that, enjoy your weekend and look forward to seeing you all on Monday. And thank you.